begin by introducing Tom McCabe briefly, who has gotten to be a good friend over the past few years. He is a mathematician, entrepreneur, and author, and founded McCabe Software, which grew to 175 people and included European subsidiaries. He's written 3 books and is widely published in computer science. He's also known as a lecturer on software development as well as on entrepreneurship. He's spoken about entrepreneurship at the University of at Cal Poly, I guess is the easiest way to say it, and at the Citadel, as well as to many other agencies, including the Chinese Space Agency, where he's talked about software reliability, and companies in California and around the country, including the Department of Defense. He is involved in all kinds of things, all kinds of intellectual and artistic activities, including he's a poet, he is an author, he's an artist. In fact, he has a creative art essay called The Vortex, currently appearing at the American Visionary Art Museum. I guess, so as I said, this is number 3 in a series of 4 lectures. This is the 3rd of the official McCabe Visiting Fellows in Entrepreneurship and the Mathematical Sciences, which grew out of Tom's interest in math and his feeling that the mathematical sciences are a gateway not only to a deeper understanding of the world, but also to all kinds of success in the world of business. Because of his efforts with this program and his distinguished career, he was awarded the Mathematics Department Distinguished Alumnus Award last year. He received a master's degree in mathematics from UConn in 1966. His work concerns a certain measure of complexity of software, which is a kind of a version of the Euler characteristic for the aficionados in the audience. But it's my pleasure now to introduce Tom, who will introduce our speaker, Ray Sidney. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good to see everybody. I want to say a few words about the McCabe lecture series and then introduce Ray. And we get a great turnout, mainly because of Ray. I think people Google Ray's name. And some long years ago, I was sitting where the students are sitting, and we had an entrepreneur mathematician give a talk. And I knew then I'd become an entrepreneur. My DNA changed. And we're here to repeat that. So we've got a great speaker. And in my case, my graduate work, I had courses in abstract algebra, and then set theory, and then graph theory. And then Ray and I have something in common that we cut our teeth working on very big systems. Ray's has survived. Mine has a lot of big projects used for a while. But I started out writing compilers, and it was about 200,000 lines of code, and it was big and it was messy, and I did that for about 8 years. And then I convinced my boss to give me 2 years to develop a more rigorous way to test algorithms, because in software development, you usually spend maybe half your time testing, and at that time there was no rigor, it was all ad hoc. So that was actually my first act of entrepreneurship, to convince my boss to give me 2 years. So at the end of 2 years, I published a paper that characterized the past of an algorithm as a vector space, and then developed a testing methodology through a basis set. And that became a national standard. And in fact, last night after I talked to Ray, I went back up to my room, and I did a Google book search on McCabe metric, and it's in 26,000 books. So and that began at UConn. So I came back 4 years ago and gave the 0th. Actually, I prefer the first. 0th just doesn't have a ring to it.
It's been distinguished.
Next year he's going to call it the -1st. -1. And gave the first lecture, trying a way to repay that debt. And there's a certain magic that's happened here. And that was the first talk. And the second talk, we had Dr. Harold Schwang, a PhD from Harvard, who was the founder of BGS systems. And those of us in my generation remember that. And it was the best company. It was in Boston that did queuing theory and network analysis at the times when operating systems and throughput was the big issue with networks. And he gave a great talk. And he likewise went to the E.O. Smith High School. He was a second Smith High School graduate at the talk. And last year we had Cleve Moeller, who was the scientist founder of MathWorks. And he gave a really interesting talk. It started out about mathematics, and he showed three guys in a convertible and a six-pack. He said that was the beginning of the company. And the next slide, he showed his native Massachusetts headquarters with 2,200 employees. So that was quite a presentation by a mathematician, scientist at that grew a company. And now we have the pleasure of having Ray here that'll talk about the early days of Google and what that was like. And likewise, PhD in math. So we're here to recreate the magic. And some student sitting here is going to come back some years later and give this talk. We'll let him use the PowerPoint, in fact. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce Ray. And Ray grew up in Storrs, Connecticut, less than a mile from UConn. And he was a student at E.O. Smith. He attended Caltech and Harvard, where he received his bachelor's degree in math in 1991 from Harvard. And he went on to get his PhD at MIT. Ray worked first as a software engineer working on encryption methods. In fact, in the same place in Columbia, Maryland, where we had a company. And then he's moved to the Lake Tahoe area where he's involved in a lot of entrepreneurial endeavors, one of which is teaching students about math. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ray Sidney.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
If you did Google me and you're looking for the gospel singer from Long Beach, California, that's in the other room. Yeah, I'm a different Ray Sidney. Okay, well, you have a little bit about my early history. I'm a local boy, pretty much. And I was always into math, and then when I found out about computers, I was always into computers. And I went to Caltech for 1 year and Harvard for the rest of my undergraduate career. And then I went and got a PhD in math from MIT. And actually, when I started grad school, I was planning on becoming a math professor. My father just retired recently from UConn, his math department. And I was planning on studying logic and devoted my life to that. And then I guess sometime maybe a year or two into grad school, I started thinking about it, and I'd done a little teaching in grad school, and I thought, I don't know, this is something that I really like that much. And I started to think, maybe I don't really like doing pure research that much. And then I was kind of left with the summer vacations as a reason to go into academia. And so I thought I would try a different approach. And so I actually never ended up applying for any academic positions, and I went straight into industry. Even though when I was an undergraduate, I took a lot of math classes, all sorts of math classes, and I really liked the idea of pure mathematics. I didn't care if something had applications. I just wasn't interested at that time. I liked programming, I liked computers, but I thought of that as something very different. I just liked math for itself. And somehow in grad school, I ended up finding that I wanted to work in industry. And so I finished up school in 1995, and I worked at a few places doing software engineering, doing cryptography, doing computer security. And then eventually, at the start of 1999, I ended up at Google. And I'm just going to change channels very briefly to talk about the genesis of Google, where it came from. Not the name, but the company concept, the way of life, if you will. So probably everybody knows that Google was founded by these two guys, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, who were, at the time, Stanford computer science graduate students. And they both came from academic families. Larry's father was a computer scientist at the University of Michigan, and Sergey's father was a mathematician at the University of Maryland. I think Sergey's mom was a physicist at NASA. And they were, they got to become very close at Stanford, and they had this idea. I think maybe Larry had the idea, I'm not sure who, had the idea to kind of look more closely at something that was, I guess, called citation rank for papers. That the idea is if you're writing a research paper, and a whole lot of people write papers that cite your paper, then you must have written a good paper, right? If a lot of people are reading your paper and thinking that it's worthy enough that they want to refer to it, then it's probably a good paper, right? And so Larry and or Sergey had the idea of applying this to web pages. And so the web was kind of in its early stages at that point. But everybody knows that if you have a web page, it can have links to other web pages. It could have, it might not have any links, but probably it does. As, it could have hundreds of links. Who knows? And so the idea is, well, if a page has lots of other web pages linking to it, then maybe it's an important page. And what do I mean by important? Well, I mean that it has a lot of pages linking to it. So that was kind of the idea. And then they actually took that one step further to create this concept they called PageRank, which is sort of amusing because it's the rank or importance of a page, and it's also Larry's last name. And PageRank is their idea of how important a web page is. And the idea is that a web page is important to the extent that a lot of important web pages link to it. So it's kind of a circular definition, and you come up with a simple system of some billions of equations if you have billions of web pages, and all you have to do is solve it, and you can figure out how important every web page is. And again, this is one measure of importance. This is it makes some sense, but it's not something that you could argue from first principles is really means that a page is important, but it's a measure. And so they came up with this. And they're like, okay, well, now that we have this page rank, now we have a way of computing how important a web page is, what should we do with it? And at the time, commercial interests were just starting to realize that the web could be a big thing for them. And that if you do a search for, I don't know why the word telephone always jumps into my head here, but you do a search for something, and if your company's web page comes up first, then maybe you're going to be able to sell a lot of your widgets, right? Whatever it is, if your page comes up in the search results for, and this is something that you see a lot of now, of course. You see everybody's interested in gaming their way to the top, and people were just starting to do that, and the early search engines really didn't have any way to deal with it. The early search engines, the way they would return search results was by essentially, if you're looking for the word widget, they would say, hey, if a page has the word widget a whole lot of times on it, then it's probably a good widget page, and so that's result number one, which seems possibly reasonable at the time, but from our lofty viewpoint now, it seems somewhat simplistic. And it was very easy for companies to game their way to the top, and you still have, there's still a lot of junk on the web. But anyway, so it turned out that Google was able to combine their notion of the importance of a web page with other measures of whether a page fits a search query to come up with something that was way better than anybody else. And so they had this search engine. And remember, they were just Stanford grad students. And like, okay, we have this search engine, gives way better search results than anybody else, so what do we do with it? So this was Stanford. They had lots of connections. At least one of them was friends with David Filo, who was one of Yahoo's founders. And so they actually went and they kind of shopped around their research project to various companies, including Yahoo. And everybody was very impressed. These are really, it's really amazing what you guys have done. So it's really great search technology, but we don't really care. It's kind of like we already have a search engine, so I think Larry and Sergey were saying we're kind of hoping that somebody would buy it off them for $1 million or something, and then they could go back to their graduate student studies, but with a slightly more pimpin' lifestyle. But nobody even wanted to pay that kind of money. So okay, well now what? And so again, this was Stanford, and so there's all kinds of connections, and so somebody arranged for them to meet up with this guy, Andy Bechtolsheim, who was actually one of the founders. He's a very technical guy. He was one of the founders of Sun Microsystems. And they showed him their stuff, and he really liked it. He was kind of in a hurry, and he just sort of said, okay, well, here's a check. And he gave him a check, as I understand it, for $100,000, made out to Google Inc. And so that check sat around for a few weeks because there was no such thing. And finally they kind of looked at each other and said, I guess we should incorporate. And so they did. And a few other well-known people coughed up some initial money also. The best known of them, there were 3 other guys who put in kind of initial angel funding at the start. Jeff Bezos, who's the CEO and founder of Amazon.com. And 2 other guys, one of whom is a very entrepreneurial guy whose company had recently been acquired by Amazon. And then there was a professor in the Stanford Computer Science Department. So they had their early funding, they had a company, they hired a guy, we'll call him Craig, because that's his name, from the Stanford Computer Science Department, who also, so all 3 of them now were on leave from Stanford Computer Science. I don't know, for a long time, Sergey told his mom he would go back and get his PhD and not shame the family. I don't know the current status. So they kind of had a company. And then in late, so now I'm going to go back to me, because that's what I know the most about. So in late 1998, I found myself looking for a job. The place where I was working was shutting down their office in the Bay Area. And I had a friend named Meredith who was dating this guy named Sergey. And she had always told me about his little search company that was just getting going. And I had another common friend who also knew Sergey. And so I thought I was making an appointment I thought I was setting up to go hang out with my other friend. We'll call him Gil because that's his name. And so he said, well, why don't we go meet over at the Google office and we'll go do some stuff. And so I go over there, and he's not there. And Larry and Sergey are there. They're the only ones. The Google office at that point is half a house. And so Larry and Sergey are there, and Sergey says, oh, you're Meredith's friend. Yeah, she just told me about you. What do you do? I said, well, I'm a software engineer, but right now I'm looking for a job. Oh, that's perfect. Right now we are hiring. Why don't you send us a resume, and then we can talk. So that was kind of the start of that. And so kind of, good old-fashioned Silicon Valley good luck on my end for, being the right guy or some approximation there too, who had the connections to get a personal face to go with my resume. And otherwise, if I hadn't known them, I didn't know about Google because I had a Stanford office mate at my previous gig who used them. At that point, basically, nobody other than Stanford people knew about Google. Because this was, again, the end of 1998, which is, think about how long ago that is in dog years. But so, I got a job offer from them and from some other companies, and tried to think, well, what should I do? And this was by far the earliest stage company that I had ever thought about working at. It was 4 people at the time, right? So there was Larry and Sergey and Craig, and then there was Heather, who Larry and Sergey and Craig all knew because she had been the grad student administrator at the Stanford Computer Science Department. And so I had some other job offers, which were at larger, more established companies, and I wasn't sure what to do because everybody knows that startups tend to fail, and the earlier a startup, the more likely it is to fail. And it didn't sound at the time like it would be fun to, I didn't really like job hunting. you can sort of enjoy it sometimes if you like flying around the country and seeing different venues. But of course, I was already in the Bay Area, so that's kind of where all the jobs I was going to be applying for were anyway. And so the thing is, I didn't want to be looking for another job in half a year. That seemed like a high-risk proposition, especially because this was a company founded by two guys who had just left Stanford grad school to do this, and it was all too easy to imagine them saying, this isn't as much fun as we thought it would be. Let's close it up and go back to school. And so actually I talked to my friend Meredith, who again was Sergey's girlfriend. I said, are these guys serious about this company? And she said, yeah, they're very serious about making a go of it. And I didn't really know the guys very well. So, at this point, I've known for a long time that they really are very sharp guys in a lot of ways. I didn't really know them very well at that point. And then she said something kind of funny. She said, and things just seem to fall into their laps. And she said that, so they were trying to figure out what to do with their company, and they met with Andy Bechtolsheim, and he just gave them a check, right? And so something that a lot of internet companies do, they have servers that live at what's called, some kind of a co-location, a data center that provides them with power, with internet, with cooling, whatever else. And I don't remember the details, but somehow they fell into a very good deal for that, like Exodus hosting, which I think is probably now not as alive as it once was. They pretty much gave them a freebie, what they call a cage, which is where they could store their servers. And hardware just seemed like, I guess they had this technique when they needed some more servers, they would go hang out on the loading dock where various professors were getting computers for their labs. And the computers would show up, and they would look at the name on it, and they would go to that professor and say, hey, would you mind if we took a few computers from you? Something like that. and they had some interesting techniques, but things just kind of kept them going their way. And later on, when people asked me, people that I was interviewing asked me, well, why did you come to Google? I always kind of gave them three primary reasons. I said, well, one is that I thought about the stuff that I would be working on. It sounded really interesting. And in truth, I more or less completely misguessed what I'd be working on. But I did work on a lot of interesting things. There, at a startup like that, there's all kinds of amazing stuff going on. And then two is that I met the guys, and that didn't take long, with 4 people. And it seemed like they would be fun to work with. And actually, I knew one guy. I knew Craig from my Harvard days a little bit. I didn't know everything about his odd dietary habits. Nice guy, but he's really picky. And then, it was a company that, again, hardly anybody knew about. And I think in those days, on a good day, we would have 10,000 search queries done at Google. And you actually move along, okay. And so, that seemed like that's pretty much nothing. But it was not that the few people who knew about the company, they really liked the company. There were a few write-ups in magazines that you've never heard of. Like there was a Russian magazine. Remember, Sergey actually was born in Russia, and he moved to the United States in his adolescence, or maybe when he was 8 or 10, I don't know. And there was a write-up in a Russian magazine. I don't know what the magazine is in general, but I know the name translated to Locomotive News. And all these write-ups were just, rave fests. They just really loved what the company had. And so I thought, okay, this is something that could work. And so I decided to give it a shot. And so I started working there approximately January 11th of 1999. And it was some long hours. Actually, the very first week I did 2 all-nighters, which was something I was not in the habit of doing anymore. But I worked with some really sharp people, and I learned a lot, and I got a lot of things done, and it was an exciting place to be. I mean, when you're working at something like that was, in this case, Google was founded by 2 guys who never had a problem thinking big. I can remember when I met with them, they were telling me about their plans, which now I guess I could describe without feeling foolish as their plans for world domination. This is 2 guys. This is half of the company, and they're telling me, well, we're thinking we'll grow around 100 people this year, go public later this year, and we should be able to have 2/3 of all search traffic by the end of the year, and stuff like that. And it really seemed a little ridiculous. And it did take longer than that for, I guess, all 3 of those, but Google had something of an inexorable march in all of those directions, right? And much of that and more has happened for them. I once, in 2000 or 2001, I was biking to work. I had been putting in long hours, and I actually fell asleep on my bike while I was biking to work. And I sort of came to in a little puddle on the road and gathered myself together and decided I would go back home that day. But let's see. I can tell you there were, so at the start we had a working search engine again, but it was something. It was school type code, proof of concept type code. It was not the kind of stuff that you would call industrial code, and we didn't have a lot in the way of QA, formal QA testing. And we would all the time, hey, I improved this kind of this server. Let's push it out and get it out there because this will improve results or improve performance. We hardly had any computers, so a little improvement in performance was a big deal because we wanted to be able to serve results to our users. Of course, now Google has so many servers that a little improvement in performance is a big deal. So maybe that never changes. But I remember I had this idea on how I could improve the performance of an aspect of our system. And it was something very simple to code up. Couldn't believe nobody had thought of it before. I don't even remember what it was. So I coded it up, and for some reason I was in a hurry. I didn't feel like I had time to test it at all, so I just kind of pushed it out. And I kind of woke up in the middle of the night, realizing, wait, this doesn't work. And I checked, I did a search query, I got totally random results. Because, what I did improve the performance, did make things go faster, but it really was giving absolutely random search results. And so that was up for, a few hours, because I pushed it out, right before going home, and I went to sleep, and so that's the cowboy days, right? That's something you shouldn't do. Let's see. So, Google was not my first job out of school, but again, it was the first time I had worked at a company this early, this small. One thing that I learned there is that, software engineering and coding, and this is all about problem solving, and a simple solution is great very often. And so we had these, we had servers of various types that, back ends for the web server, as well as the web server itself, and these servers were constantly being updated. It would be, modifying the code for them, and then they would push out the new version of the index server, or of the doc server, or of the web server, okay? Because you make little changes, and you want to push it out there. Get that out into the world. And, with these things being, we didn't even, for a long time, we didn't even have formal releases, formal software releases. Just, okay, we have it out there, let's push it out there. Every now and then we would find ourselves in a situation, well, this executable doesn't work. How was it built anyway? Now it's very different. But, so sometimes if you're constantly making changes like this, software sometimes crashes, right? And, it's not good when your software crashes. You want to be in control of your software, but there are going to be bugs, and if they just happen once in a blue moon, how do you deal with it? You want your stuff to be reliable. You want your servers to keep on running. So the simple solution at Google was that if you had a server running on a machine, you would put a little, what we would call a loop script around it. That basically, that script runs the program, and then if the program dies, control returns to that loop, and this loop just restarts it again, And there's some logging going on, but basically it's just, hey, if this server crashes, you just start it again. It just all happens automatically. And, it's brain dead simple, especially compared to going through 100,000 lines of code to find what the actual problem is. If it's a serious problem, obviously you're going to need to find it anyway. But if it's just once in a blue moon that something crashes and maybe, 1 out of 1,000 people is going to have to submit their query twice to Google to get a result, could be worse, right? So, hey, here's a simple solution. So I'm guessing those servers still run on those little loop scripts. And from the early days, again, so I was talking about how Google would just kind of, not purloin, but they would just appropriate servers from computers that were delivered to folks on campus with permission, or half with permission. But Google was running basically exclusively on PCs, more or less. And these days, their stuff is running on, all their servers are still PCs, basically. It's kind of customized. They spec out every aspect of it. We want these memory chips, we want this motherboard, we want these hard drives, et cetera. But, it's pieces that anybody could build a computer out of, and it's cheap, right? PCs cost nothing these days. In Silicon Valley, they like to say that what hard disk manufacturers actually sell, they're in the business of selling aluminum, right? And just, prices are going down and down. There's not much overhead above that. All right, well, here's something. I started at the start of 1999, and there were 5 of us once I started. And we kept on hiring people, mostly engineers, not exclusively. But in the middle of 1999, it was time to get some real money. And so at that point, all the VCs and really everybody wanted to get in on internet investments and search investments. And Google, people had started to take notice of Google. They saw how much better it was than everybody else, and they really thought that it had potential, so everybody wanted in on Google. And so Larry and Sergey started talking to venture capitalists, and they spent a while doing it, and thinking about the merits of their various possibilities. And then eventually they did something which at the time I didn't realize, but probably really was very smart. They got $25 million from venture capitalists, and they did it half from one group and half from another. There were 2 groups that, I don't know if they were enemies to the death, but they were guys who didn't really get along and had never done an investment together before. And so, as a result, so each of these guys got a board seat on Google with their investment, a certain amount of power. But the idea was, these guys were never going to agree on anything, so it was going to be very difficult for them to really gang up on Larry and Sergey and cause some change in power, something that they didn't want. And again, it took me a while to really appreciate the wisdom of that. Larry and Sergey were, not just technically savvy. They actually, from somewhere, I don't know where, because they were just grad students when they started this. Sorry, I know there's probably grad students. But they had some sharp business skills, and I remember they talked to one venture capitalist named Bill Gurley. I forget who he was from, but every time he would come in to talk with them, Sergey would tell us, "Oh, the Gurley mine is coming," and so we'd get amused by that. All the more amused because he was about 6'6". But we did not eventually end up taking money from the Gurley Mons company. And so it's funny, at the time though, so 1999, boy, everybody wanted to give them money, right? And they could pick and choose, and they did pick and choose, and I guess it worked out okay that they took money from. I will say, at this present time, do not count on getting money that easily for your project if you're trying to get something going. Hopefully it'll happen, but it can be a little bit more work, and it can be depressing looking for money, especially these days. So these days I do a certain amount of angel investing, and so far I'm not sure that I'm doing such a good job of it. I'm involved with some companies, and they have a great future, but the future always seems to be in the future, if you know what I mean. And I feel like the way it is with venture capitalists, for the most part, when you don't need money, it's really easy to raise money. If you're, everybody wants to fund you once you're profitable, right? Because then, they know their money is not going to go to some black hole. Well, when you're profitable, that may not be when your need is the most dire. And it's kind of similar, when you already have a job. For some reason, it's easy to find a job. At least, these days it may not be easy to find another job, but it's easier than if you don't have a job. If you don't have a job, then your network starts shrinking, and your if you go long enough without a job, people wonder why you haven't had a job, and they want someone who is a good worker, which is somebody who's already working. So, it never rains, it pours, or whatever the appropriate idiom is. It can be difficult to bootstrap things, and that's a real lesson for anybody starting their own gig. Once you have your company started, once you've gotten things going, once you have some employees, especially once you have some revenue, it's a whole lot easier to get more of it. But getting things started, finding a first key employee who really has the right experience that you need, or getting someone other than you or your parents to put in that first bit of money, that can be really tough. And so it's really worth thinking about how to do it. It's really worth thinking about when it comes to looking for money, think about what an investor or would-be investor would want to see, and think about how you can deliver that. Let's see. So that's under my unsolicited advice paragraph here. Let's see. So I think I may switch to Q&A mode now. Seem reasonable? Yeah. So I'm pretty good with Q&A. So hopefully, think of some questions that I'm happy to answer personal questions. But think of some stuff that's going to be interesting. That's going to maybe give you food for thought. And that other people are going to get something out of. That's the ideal question.
So thank you. All right, we're going to switch modes, but we can have a round of applause. So we'll do. I will be the question moderator, and we'll have a little panel here. And but before we start, I wanted to, on behalf of the university and the College of Arts and Sciences, present you this token of our appreciation.
Thank you. That's a beautiful box.
It's okay, so I will take questions for our panelists, and our first questioner is Mark Nagel.
I'm curious, if this had not been in California, but it had been Boston instead, would it have gotten off the ground? I mean, would the contacts have been there, even though the people would have been the same?
Well, to some extent, I would say the people would have been different. Definitely, Boston is another. It's not Silicon Valley, but it is a hotbed of activity like that. And you have about 1 billion schools there, and all the talents of the faculty and students. And I mean, I guess Lycos came from somewhere in the Boston area, right? Not that that's necessarily something you want to emulate. But there are great companies, and MIT. I think MIT and other schools have kind of looked at how Stanford seems to foster entrepreneurialism in the school, and especially in the computer science department, and think, well, how can we learn lessons from that? And I'm not a Stanford guy, so I don't directly know what the culture is there, but it is, and it can, that kind of entrepreneurialism can start with just a few people leaving the department to start their own gig and meeting with some success, and then the people that they know see that, and that gives them ideas and courage. And so I think MIT the past 10 years has been seeing a lot more of that than it used to, and well, there's Facebook from Harvard, that's one example. So I think it can happen anywhere. The connections and thus the shape that things have is going to be a function of the venue.
Trudy.
Hi, I'm Trudy Nichols. Everyone likes to have something free, and that's what Google gave us when they were searching. How did they come up with the idea of getting the adverts in with the search, and when?
So the original Google business plan was essentially, we are going to, does anybody remember the term portal? So Yahoo, I don't know if they use that term anymore, but Yahoo was a portal, Excite was a portal, Lycos was a portal. You know, it's kind of this website where you go do all sorts of stuff. And the original business model was to supply search technology for guys like that. And they weren't going to have a portal, and they were just going to have a very simple website of their own for search, and they were going to make their money by licensing it out. And I think they actually, they raised that $25 million of venture capital with that business plan and that premise. And then sometime in the middle of 1999, sometime right around when Larry and Sergey went shopping for venture capital, somebody said, all these other guys are serving ads. Even if we're not going to have a portal, it seems like maybe we're leaving some relatively easy money on the table. So, it's worth writing up some basic ad server and putting some ads on there, and let's see how it goes. And if I remember correctly, so the original ad system was very different than what it is now. If I remember correctly, the first ad served on Google was for someone selling lobsters. Lobsters through the mail. I'm a fan. And it turned out very quickly that started making money, and there were a lot of different aspects to the system that could be tweaked and improved to make more money. And I know people who are still at Google who are very highly placed on the advertising side, like technically in terms of how that system works. And there's a very well-known economist, Hal Varian, who's, I guess, his official title there is Google economist. And in a sense, these days, every search you do on Google is from one viewpoint is an auction. That you're looking at all the people who are interested in buying an ad on those keywords, on those search terms, and what are they willing to bid? Various other circumstances. How much do people tend to click, because Google only charges you if you actually click on an ad, etc. And then from that you figure out which ads to show in a way that makes advertisers happy, that makes people who are searching happy. You don't want to be showing them totally random stuff. And of course, that makes Google's pockets happy. And I forgot the original question, but perhaps that was the answer to it. Yeah.
Back to the point about locale, Washington, D.C. is not a bad place. Right now it's terrible with all the politics. In fact, it's a pleasure being here. It's an equal pleasure being away from D.C. But in Washington, we used to get SBIRs for research and get funding from the federal government. And the proximity helped a lot. And there's a lot of biotech. Actually, in my CEO club, Jim Kimsey was in it. He grew part of our line back then. In spite of the demise, it was a good company at that point. So Washington's a good place. I think about Stanford, about the synergy with all the entrepreneurs. I think it has a lot to do with the way they handle patents. And I think they're very liberal about that. And I think as a result, there's all sorts of entrepreneurs spin off. And the blowback is good back to the university.
I know that the concept of PageRank, or the implementation of PageRank, or whatever, I'm not an IT guy, PageRank is patented, and since when that technology was created while Larry and Sergey were at Stanford. Is it still on? Yeah.
It's still on. Tilted up a little bit.
Okay. That Stanford actually owns the patent, and when they started the company, they got an exclusive license for that patent, for which I believe they gave Stanford 10 or 15% of the company, which is nice for Stanford. And when something like that happens, and it's a huge runaway success like Google was, then definitely that makes other universities think about how they can foster that kind of result as well.
I mean,
so, in your talk, you mentioned about having connections and getting funding. What would your general advice be to the people who have ideas and students who have ideas to look for? Where do they look for funding?
So, I mean, you can cold call whomever you like, right? And there's venture capitalists in the New England area, and you can talk to them, and or you can email them or whatever, and they may or may not get back to you, right? And obviously, just like anything else, cold calling is the least likely way to get somebody there. So definitely the best thing is if you have, a friend of a friend who's, in the business of investing in those kind of companies, or I'm not sure how far you can get towards Kevin Bacon along those lines, a friend of a friend, a friend of a friend. That might be a bit much. But you can go, look around the campus, for example, and see who is there, who is interested in the stuff that you're doing or that you want to do, and talk to them. Whether whether it's a grad student, whether it's faculty, or other. And these people, if it's something, if you can find someone who is very interested in what you're doing, then they might also have some useful connections.
I would also add, it's not just MIT that has paid attention to what Stanford has done, but we're interested too. There are arrangements through the university for licensing of technology, and if there's anybody out there that has any innovative ideas and, for example, feels that Google is vulnerable, I'm sure that President Hearst will cut you a good deal on your license.
We took a different approach. We were lucky we could bootstrap, and I mentored quite a few entrepreneurs, and I advised them to avoid raising money if they can. And we were lucky that first off the paper got published, and then we grew a consulting company. And first general, just software engineering consulting, but then it was McCabe specific to our technology. And then it was going to take millions of dollars to develop a product, and I waited some years. But what worked was pre-selling. We actually went to several clients and said they were using our technology without the product by hand. So we had a proposal to build a product, and they put money in, and we gave them a 50% discount on user licenses. And we had several people do that, and that was our funding. And we kept all the intellectual rights, and there were no complications with VCs. The problem is once you start dealing with venture capitalists, they're also known as vulture capitalists, and we find out why. And then likewise with hardware, back in when we had the company, it was working on workstations, and they were $40,000, $50,000 a whack. Some of the workstations, the silicon graphics, the DEC. And we bought the first computer, but then we went to IBM and DEC and silicon graphics and said, look, everybody's using the software on the Sun computer. You need to give us a computer. And they did, and they put it there. So we could bootstrap it, and life was a lot more simple. And for a scientist, mathematician, entrepreneur, that's more the sweet spot. When you complicate it with outside funding, you spend 50% of your time dealing with finance, and it dilutes what you're doing, and that other world has nothing to do with that. Now, then again, there's wonderful resources here, and there's people in MBA programs where a lot of times when the technical company grows, one of the partners is doing financing. So somebody with an MBA could join and be that other mindset.
There was a question up here.
Hi, Ray. I had a question. Do you have any real-life stories from Google in the early days where, your background, PhD in math, and really solving complex problems was balanced with startup with it used to run yesterday? So you touched briefly on the simplicity of the reboot when something crashes. So I wondered if you had another example where you felt you could have gone further in a more complicated but very sophisticated solution, but you ended up opting for a simpler, just to get it out there.
That's definitely that's a real engineering question. You guys remember there's an engineering idiom, I think, the perfect is the enemy of the good, right? If you want to, meaning that if you want to work on something and make it perfect, you'll probably never get it done. It'll never be good enough, so you'll never actually get the job done at all. And so, yes, how do you decide? And I guess no one particular situation is jumping out at me. But anytime you're building software, anytime you're designing classes for your software or whatever, I mean you're making compromises, right? You're not gonna reflect absolutely every bit of complexity that's in there, because you're not gonna live long enough to write that. But and so it's a real, this is where experience comes in, right? Figuring out what level of complexity you need in there, and what is going to be good enough. And so one thing that people do with, in software, people get excited about optimizing their code, and oh, look at this, we're going to do this in hand-tuned assembly language. Look at this, we can save a clock cycle here, or whatever, right? Which is great. And then it turns out, you do all this work optimizing, you write your whole system in assembly language, and it's barely faster. And it turns out, when you're going to try and tune something for performance, you profile it and you figure out where is all the time being spent, right? That should be one of the first things that you do. And if all the time is being spent in this one little loop, or 99% of the time is just being spent in this one little loop, then that means that all the rest of your code, you don't need to worry about how fast it's going, right? You just deal with that one loop, and you figure out either, okay, I'm going to really take a close look at this and write it the way it should be. I'm going to change the algorithm that we're using here, or maybe it does mean that, because of your data structure or something, that other stuff has to be changed. But and I know I'm not exactly answering your question, but I'm doing what I can. But I think it's very easy to get carried away by making pretty code that at the end of the day, it's really neat. Oh, what a great hack! But it doesn't actually matter. And so, I'm not sure if I have really good advice in how to do that, other than if you're going to redo something for performance reasons, figure out what it is that needs to be redone.
So I have time for another question. Yes.
The math and science education, I understand, is something that you care about. And I was wondering if you could say something about what works, what doesn't work at the public school level as well as the university level.
So I've been hanging out with a lot, I don't have any kids of my own that I know of, but I've been hanging out with a lot of kids, middle schoolers, high schoolers, the past some years. Admittedly I live in Nevada, but I've been pretty appalled at the state of, what they get under the guise of education, especially math education. I have kind of a soft spot for that one. And I guess what I see is that, the kids, the good kids, or the good students, they're motivated by grades, and they are under the mistaken impression that if they're getting A's, that's all they need to get along, to be prepared for college, to be prepared for life. And once upon a time, maybe that was so. Maybe never in Nevada, I don't know. But what I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to figure out to get them to understand is that they need to understand that it's not enough to, especially in math classes, to just be able to, solve the exact repertoire of problems that their teacher is giving them. That if they don't actually understand how the things work, then they're living a lie. That's at the elementary or primary school level. I don't know how it is in colleges these days. I know, I think a lot of kids in my neck of the woods, what they're taught under the guise of math is so boring that they're going to take, that once they don't have to take math classes, by God, they're not going to take math classes or anything related to it. So what they're learning, instead of learning math, they're learning that this stuff that we think is math is really appallingly unpleasant, and so I guess I'm going to steer away from anything that requires any of that. I think, at the college level, by me, I get the impression things are a lot better than at the, primary school level, except that the kids have already been taught to hate this stuff, and if they actually try to take math classes because, I never really liked this stuff, but I always wanted to be an engineer, whatever that is, and I'm told that I need to take some of this stuff, then they get to college and they're pretty much ripe for a butt kicking, because they've never had to do anything that actually involves thinking. So that's my optimistic picture.
How about this will be the last one? Yes.
In the 70s, I paid several $1,000s for an additional 8K of memory. And back then, labor was cheap compared to memory. Now it's the other way around. I have the impression that Microsoft programming is quite sloppy. At Google, would you consider the programming tight or sloppy?
Well, and so Google has a lot of engineers now, right? And it's a big organization, and you have some people who are real artists with code, and some people who aren't. I think everybody, a good engineer evolves, right? Because the tool sets they're working with evolve, and there's new languages, there's new programming environments, and all of these things. A new language or a new programming environment comes about because whoever is creating it thinks that it's going to be a productivity enhancer for some kinds of projects at least, right? And some of them work well, and some of them turn out are really good for a huge variety of things, and those things become popular. Some of them, kind of own a certain niche of development, and some of them never go anywhere. But I think, again, getting back to what David asked, or what I sort of answered when David asked, was that it's important to know where you should be spending your effort. And as long as, if some code works robustly, it doesn't have to be the prettiest stuff, it doesn't have to be the most efficient stuff, as long as it's efficient enough, right? Because your tools are changing, your hardware is changing, everything pretty rapidly still. Okay, your clock cycles on your chips aren't going any higher these days very much, but even so, the chips are getting faster in different ways, and so, if you spend all this time making the perfect code for your current setup, and then 3 months down the road, oops, we're switching to a new chip and whatever, then maybe all that careful time you spent optimizing and perfecting is no longer so useful, right? And so, things don't last long, and so think of everything as a moving target, and you need to do the best you can that you have time for at the moment. And so, there's plenty of fat in the system.
All right. I think we're out of time, so could we have a round of applause? Tom and Tom and Ray for before I can't help myself because of all of this discussion about the perfect being the enemy of the good, and I tend to always classify things by which science fiction story applies. And there is a very relevant science fiction story by Arthur Clarke called Superiority, which I recommend as a follow-on reading for this event. But now we can adjourn to actually a totally different building, the biology physics building, for a reception. I hope you'll join us there, and if you don't know where that is, follow